but I love Greg's teaching, so we'll try to, the B team's here, just to say, like in football terms, sports here. I think they're in Gatlinburg.
Oh, it's the following week. Never mind.
What? More?
We'll be here next week. It's the following week we're gone. Never mind. I'm losing my mind. Sorry.
Okay. All right, let me ask you this first of all. What is the most fearful event you've ever, I got to stay still. What is the most fearful event that you ever had in your life? Something that just paralyzed you with fear. Talk to me.
Car accident.
Car accident.
Wrecked the motorcycle.
Cancer. Yeah.
Wrecked the motorcycle.
Wrecked. Ooh. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Other stuff.
And cancer. I had cancer.
Oh, you had cancer?
Cancer.
Recovered from that? Okay.
Not like that motorcycle. That motorcycle.
You're lucky to be here on a motorcycle. A lot of people don't make it. Okay. Okay. I flying the airplane with an instructor one time. We were doing some stuff over near Gulf Shores, came back towards Foley, going to Fairhope. Brain dead today, I'm sorry. Going to Fairhope, and the engine quit. Okay. And we're 3,500 feet. And we were able to coast all the way back to Fairhope. The guy says, "Where do you land? You go land it in the fields." Fields, I said, "Yeah, there's cows in those fields." All those places over there. I was scared. That's the scariest I've ever been in my life. Okay, that kind of stuff. So, we have fearful experiences that cause us a lot of anxiety and that kind of stuff. Well, today, that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Kind of a theme for today's lesson. The title for today's lesson is The Land. That type of stuff. Now, it's interesting that we're in the book of Numbers. It's interesting, we call it the book of Numbers in English. Guess what they call it in the Hebrew Bible? In the wilderness. And the reason they do is because the first few chapters of Numbers kind of deal with numbers, of people and places and things to go to do, and the Ten Commandments and all those kinds of things. But once you get on into Numbers, you're really into the journey in the wilderness to get back over toward the Promised Land. And so, Numbers applies to only the opening accounts. They're taking a census, and they're being told how to set up the camps, and who's going to go first in the march when they move, and all those logistical type things. The whole book has three sections. Primarily, they depart from Mount Sinai. They go to a place called Kadesh Barnea. Okay. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. You don't name any of your children Kadesh Barnea, that kind of stuff. But it's a place. I can't see this. I'm sorry. It's right here. It is in the Holy Land. It's just kind of southwest of the Dead Sea, that type of thing. And so they're on that journey, and then you have the journey from Kadesh Barnea where they go back up and go up and cross over the Jordan River and come through the Jericho Pass to get to the Jerusalem area, and that's where they're taking on the Canaanites. So that's kind of the whole story. So they've got 4 years in the wilderness, and the greatest portion of this is spent at Kadesh Barnea. Okay, I've always had the idea, and probably you do too, especially growing up, that they were just out in the desert, the Saudi Arabian Peninsula Desert, just wandering around for 40 years. That's not true. They wandered for about 5 years, but then after about 5 years, they wander over to Kadesh Barnea, and they stay there for 35 years. Why is that important? Kadesh Barnea is in heaven. This one's not far enough. Kadesh Barnea is down here, but it is on what's called the King's Highway. King's Highway runs right down through the middle of the Holy Land, on up to Damascus, Syria, north of here, and then back over and back down into Mesopotamia. Back in those days, it's modern-day Iran. That's where Ur of the Chaldees was, in the Garden of Eden, and that's where Abraham came from. And he made this march, and he established cities all along the way, naming of his children. Okay, and usually these are the children by the concubines, not by Sarah. That type of situation. So that's kind of the biblical setting. So it's 1 year after once they exodus. Egypt, after 400 years of slavery, they wander down to Mount Sinai, and then they stay there for about a year or so. That's where they get all the Numbers things in the early books of early chapters of Numbers, and then they have the instruction on how to build the tabernacle. We've kind of been through all of that in some of our other writings, And so at the end of the first year, they take a census. And it takes 19 days to count the people. But they only count the men. I'm sorry. They just didn't count y'all at all, okay? There were 600 plus thousand men. But it took 19 days to count them all. Imagine they're moving around, kind of like trying to count fleas, where are you now? That type of situation. And so, one thing leads to another, they've got the count, and they're ready to go. Now, the people here in Numbers are pictured as people who are faithless, they're rebellious, and they're totally blind to what all the things God is doing for them. Remember, He's feeding them and keeping them near water. Chapter 10 shows them on the march, and then chapter 11 that we looked at last week, the people are complaining. I'm tired of manna. Okay, if manna had been a nice beef steak, I'll start to say good pork, because Jesus wouldn't do pork. But they get tired of this food, and it's pretty thin. It's not very nourishing. It's mainly a sugar, carbohydrate type food, that kind of stuff. But they do have water. Remember, you had the cloud and the fire, and they were following that, and they would move from place to place. What was going on there was God was moving them from water supply to water supply, oasis to oasis, all down the southern Arabian Peninsula. Imagine the amount of water that it takes for cattle and for 2 million people. Okay, we think there are at least 2 million people there. So, one thing, God's taking care of them. Moses last week, of course, is complaining. I've got these 2 million people, Lord. It's just wearing me out. I just can't take it anymore. Why don't you just kill me now and take me on to heaven? Okay, we've all been to that point sometimes, like just rock bottom. Moses is a human being. He's not a Charlton Heston with a script. Okay, these people are far more human and feet of clay than we realize sometimes. So he's just kind of worn out about it. So God sets up these 70 men to help him out. That gets us up to chapter 12. We didn't look at chapter 12, but there's an interesting story there. This is the story of Aaron and Miriam. First of all, Aaron is Moses' younger brother. He's married to this lady, Miriam, who, and kind of speculating here, but reading between the lines, I think it pretty well fits. She's a social climber. She's a socialite. She likes to be seen. And so she brings up a topic with Moses and Aaron. Does God just speak to Moses? Why can't God speak to my Aaron? Okay, you can kind of imagine. Okay, you got it. Okay, you got it. Yeah. She's a social climber. She's social. Why can't, of course, later on she will want to hold in with Aaron. But, why can't God? She is a royal pain in the gluteus maxima. Okay, I can't say that word asking something else. But anyhow, that's the kind of problem that we got going on. Moses makes it worse. See, he got trouble already. He marries a Cushite woman. He's about 45, we think, and speculation has the way people married back in those days. These were the good old days, guys. You married a woman about 20 years younger than you. She's about in her early 20s, and he's in his probably mid 40s. Don't. Okay, that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? Aaron's on his case again, probably at the encouragement of Miriam. I can't believe what you're doing. One day I'm over at Longhorn Steakhouse, and I got seated in the corner back there with a colleague. Okay, female colleague, I was about 72, she was about 42. Okay, we've been good friends for a long time. Guess who walks up to the corner booth? My granddaughter. Hi, Poppy. The mother and that family have been seated right next to me. Now, what are the odds of that? God does some strange things. That had to be an act of God. That's beyond probability. And so, no sooner than I get home, this is a dinner meeting. It's a little shady, but whatever. But she's not been good friends for a long time. She's been about changing companies, changing jobs, and with a different organization. And we were talking about it and that kind of stuff. I get a telephone call. I had no sooner gotten home. Yes, Tiffany. Okay. Then she called my daughter-in-law. Poppy, what are you doing? Tiffany just called me. You were out with a 42-year-old. You lost your mind. Got to have a little comedy in religious circles. Okay. So, Miriam's in a lot of trouble. Guess what God does? God, at the end of the first year or so, along the way, he strikes her with leprosy. That's a curse. Okay, I can't imagine these boils and whatever, how bad that could be. You know, it was really bad for Job. I can imagine she probably had a terrible case too. So they have to kick her out of the camp. No city, they kick her out of the camp. She's out there for 7 days. And then suddenly she has a miraculous healing and gets to come back in on the 8th day. Okay, can you imagine the social buzz? You know what happened to Mary? You know, yeah, God took care of her. You know, she said something wrong. God did it. Okay, I can imagine her social status probably went, down a little bit. Okay. Interesting. The next day, the cloud moves and the fire moves, and so all the Israelites, 2 million, have to pack up and start moving in an organized fashion. And so, interesting things happen to these people as we go along. Now, we're in chapter 13 today. What's going to happen is Moses selects. Had the encouragement and push of Aaron and Miriam and probably many others too, to send out these 12 scouts. He chooses 1 scout from each tribe. Okay, and he wants them probably about 20 to 40 years of age, because they're going to go into the Holy Land. They're going to go. They're going to go straight up to what we call the Holy Land today, all the way up into Lebanon and even up into Syria. And then they're going to come down and go almost all the way down to the Nile Valley and where the Nile River is, what's called the Nile River Basin. So they're going to travel about 500 miles. And they're going to do that in 40 days. That's probably 10 to 15 miles a day, probably on foot. Okay? Some of y'all walk 2 or 3 miles a day. Triple it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so it's quite, by the way, they didn't have good shoes like we do either, so it probably was barefoot. So, this area had been promised, to the Israelites, but it had been 450 years since any Israelite ever even been in there. The King's Highway goes right through the middle of it, so it's a well-traveled route, but, the Jews just weren't there. So they travel in late summer, maybe early fall, because they want to see what the crops are like. What kind of land? Will this land support this many people? Okay, with adequate water supplies, etc. And so they return at the end of 40 days with a report, and that's kind of the summary of our lesson today. So let's look at the first passage. It's called the Task Outline. Let's see, I think on the book, y'all have the large print book, right? Is that right? Page 30? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, some of the different books, I got no book. Okay, so look on page 30 with me. And let's take a look at this first passage. It's chapter 13, verses 17 through 20. Read something like this. When Moses sent them out to scout out the land of Canaan, he told them, "Go up this way to the Negev, then go up into the hill country. See what the land is like, whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Is the land they live in good or bad? Are the cities they live in encampments or fortifications? Is the land fertile or unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? Be courageous. Bring back some fruit from the land." It was the season for the first ripe grapes. Okay, so where is the Negev? This may be in the back of your book, by the way, if you can't see way over here. Here's Kadesh Barnea. Okay, down on the south. This is a semi-arid area. It's not that productive, but it's semi-desert. It's called the Negev, N-E-G-E-V, in this area. And there's several people that live here. You've got the Philistines over here in the hills, and you've got we talk about the other camps that are out in there too. He says, head north up here to the Negev, and he wants them to follow on up. As you get further up, it's called the hill country, but it's where most of the people today in Israel live. It's the area along the Jordan River Valley, and then it goes up to a mountain, and you come over, and you've got a coastal plain that goes out to where modern Tel Aviv is, and Jaffa, and that type of thing. And so, it's a very productive area for crops and things of that nature. So the people approach Moses, and he sends out the scouts, probably because of Aaron and Miriam, one from each tribe. And he addresses these 4 questions. He says, what are the people like? What is the land like? What are the cities like? And what are the trees like? In other words, are there plants and farming going on up there that will support us? Okay? So let's go ahead and look at the second session here, called The Land of Sept, on page 31 down at the bottom. It says, so they went up and scouted out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance to Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahiman and Shishai and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were living. Hebron was built 7 years before Zion in Egypt. A little sideline. Zion is a city down in the Nile River Delta that was the capital of Egypt before Cairo was the capital of Egypt. Okay. Most of the slaves that came out of slavery were probably around Zion, not around Cairo. So it picks up in verse 23. When they came to Eshcol Valley, they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, which was carried on a pole by 2 men. They also took some pomegranates and figs. That place was called Eshcol Valley because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting out the land. So, they traveled the King's Highway, going north. They're looking for everything. In the first place that they stopped is a place called Hebron. I don't think it's on this map. Hebron is right here. Why is Hebron important? When Abraham came from Mesopotamia and the Garden of Eden place, went up over and established Damascus and Dan and all these towns coming down to the south, he got down to Hebron and he stopped and he bought some land. He bought some land from a man named Enoch, A-N-A-K, Enoch. We could look at this. Name your kid Enoch. I don't know where he came up with these names. Paul, John, Larry. Yeah, because he bought this land. And Abraham established him in his family, and that's where he had all his children, okay, did all his farming. He'd come from a very rich place. This was not as rich as what he'd come from, but it was adequate. He buys this large tract of land, and to the east are some hill countries. And when Abraham died, he was buried in a cave that he had gotten to bury his family in. Sarah was buried there first, then Abraham, then Isaac, Jacob, and Rebekah, and Leah were all buried there. Put that as a middle note because that's going to come back at the end of where we are today. So this is the area firmly established by Abraham, and this is the area that God is talking about. He's going to give the country back to the Jews. And so, they buy some grapes. Okay? Now, when you and I go to Publix, buy a thing of grapes, a stalk of grapes, what do you call these? Well, cluster of grapes. Yeah, cluster, I guess, what we use the word. Cluster of grapes. Those weigh probably 2 pounds. 2 pounds. Okay. It's not unusual for grapes in this area, which is prime grape growing country, to weigh as much as 20 pounds. Okay? But it says here in our text that these grapes were so big, this cluster was so big, that I put it on a pole. And 2 men had to carry it by hand. Okay? So you imagine it may have been up to 40 pounds. We're speculating, we don't know. But it had to be one big cluster of grapes for them to carry back and forth. And it says, they're moving back and forth. The land is productive. And they get ready to make the report back to Moses and to Aaron. So look within verse 26, page 33. The decision at hand is the title of this one. The men went back to Moses, Aaron, and the entire Israelite community in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back a report for them and the whole community, and they showed them the fruit of the land. They reported to Moses, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey, and here is some of its fruit. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the city is large and fortified. We also saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites, those were the sons of Anak. The Amalekites are living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the crowd, or quieted the people in the presence of Moses and said, "Let us go up and take possession of the land, because we can certainly conquer it." But the men who had gone up with him responded, "We can't attack the people because they are stronger than we are." Caleb is the leader. He talks out loud. He represented Judah, which is the tribe who had the greatest power in the Israeli camp. And he has with him Joshua, who represented another one of the tribes. But Joshua takes the back seat politically because he had been an assistant to Moses, and he felt like talking up would probably look like they set things up. All the other 10 guys say, "We can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it." Now, this area around Hebron was ruled by Anak back in these days, the Amalekites. These are people who are descendants of Esau. Remember the Jacob and Esau story, where Esau stole the birthright of Jacob? You know, that type of thing. That's the kind of people that they are. Okay, character tends to kind of go from one generation to the other. Now, these people, these Amalekites, they were big people, especially for that day. The average Jew of that day was about 5 feet tall. Okay, some of you women, how tall are you? 4'11"? 4'11", 5 feet in heels, right? I know, just kissing height. I know. Had a shorter wife kissing him. Had a lady the other day online wanted to go out with me, but she was 6'2", and I said, I don't think so. But they say, well, what kind of people are these Amalekites? They are giants. Most sources say they were at least 7 feet tall. And some sources even think they may have been 9 feet tall. Okay? I mean, those people are giants for us today. It's like NBA players, that come from overseas that are so big. And so, and they're large. They're not just tall and skinny. They're large and they're muscular. They have big feet, big hands, big arms, big girth. Okay, that's this. It's like in my girth. And so, they are huge guys. In fact, the term Anak really means bull neck, back neck. Okay? You see these football players in college, I've probably seen them pros today. I kept looking at them yesterday after reading the lesson, that kind of stuff. Their neck's as big as their head. Whatever. No wonder they don't break their neck. That kind of stuff. These guys are giants. And so, pretty intimidating. Job 39, Job talks about him. He said this. He says, "We were like grasshoppers in their sight. They looked upon us with scorn and disdain, and we trembled with fear." Okay, well, I probably would. I was the smallest guy on my football team. I know exactly the fear that they have. A in-sweep came around my way, I was going for a ride somewhere. Okay, that type of thing. And they were nomads, and they occasionally partnered with the Canaanites, and they would go and make war against other countries. So the Canaanites were good warriors, and then you got these giants. We don't think they were fast, maybe. We don't know. But they were there. Now, who are these people? These are ancient, well, how do we put this? Yeah, these are ancient descendants of the Philistines. Remember, they were up in the hill country along there. And they were living down in the Negev Valley, so to speak. It's kind of semi-desert area, but there's enough water to get by. But evidently the water is contaminated by something coming out of the mountains. And it affects their thyroid. They get hyperthyroid type syndrome. And that's what causes them to be such big people. Okay, it's what we think happened back in those days. Now, the most famous descendant of Anak, the old guy. Remember David and Goliath? Yeah, Goliath was an Anakian, an Amalekite. Okay, and we think he was about 7 feet tall. David was probably about 4 or 5. He was still a kid, I don't think he was even a teenager yet when he was killed. The giant. Now, we don't have verse 32 in our study today, but let me kind of tell you a little bit about it. He says, also, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. When you go into chapter 14, you find that it describes a plague that is affecting the Amalekites. Okay? They're going through a plague and they're sick and they're weak could God be preparing an easy path like he did coming out of Egypt for the Israelis to go into the promised land? Well, that's not the way the people see it, the ten that are naysayers. We might catch what they've got, and it could kill us too. That type of thing. Now, there are a lot of other people there. They're the Hethites. These are the descendants of Noah. They're the Jebusites. Originally, Jerusalem, which is right up around here, was named Jebu, after Jebu, Jebu. Okay? And later on, when David, the king, took over, this is another 350 years or so. When David takes over, he goes to a Jebusite and he purchased this large amount of property. And that property today is what we know as the Temple Mount today. The old city walls, that was the area that bounded what David purchased for the temple. So these people are all around there. There's another group to the north that are pretty mean and pretty rough too, called the Amorites. They came from Mesopotamia about 2000 BC. And they had two famous kings. One was Sihon, and the other was Og. O-G. Okay. Crazy names, Come here, Og. Okay, all right. They would kill you in a heartbeat. They loved to make war. They jumped on anybody, everybody, it didn't matter what side you were. They tried to kill everybody. And they lost a lot, but they won a lot. They had a very small army. And then, of course, you got the Canaanites. They're along the coastal plain here, but also there's a mountain range right here, small mountains, not real high mountains. And then there's an area down by the Jordan River where people live today. It's interesting today, the plain area around Tel Aviv is modern like we are. You cross the mountain and you step back 2,000 or 3,000 years. People still have camels, live in that area and camp out down by the Jordan River. That type of thing. Very interesting how they divide each other. So, we got other people there. We got the Girgashites, the Perizzites, the Hivites. We got Ites, Edomites, Moabites. We got Ites all over the place. Okay, going over there. So the 10 spies say, we can't do it. People are too strong. They're too fierce. Large cities, fortified cities. Anok's people are still over there. And then we got the plague. Well, Caleb and Joshua remind Moses that God has promised this land to us, for years. This is the trust and the agreement he had with Abraham. And so, it's interesting, we go on into Numbers 14, which we're not going to look at today, but Caleb and Joshua go into the Holy Land eventually. You see how this crazy route they take to get there. Instead of taking the easy way, they take the hard way. Okay? And so all 10 other guys die from a plague on the way to the Holy Land that the Jews took. Isn't that interesting? Okay. All this is well documented too, with local historians and when you go over to that part of the world. And so, it's interesting later on, Caleb is given a parcel after they make it over to the Holy Land. He's given the parcel of Hebron, which is right along in here. Remember, that's Abraham's old land place. Old place. It's called country. A lot of been around the country a lot, right? The countryside. Yeah, he gets the old homestead. Okay, and he lives there, and he and his family are buried there. And the allegory of that part of the country says that he was buried in the cave next to Abraham and Sarah and their family. So, a lot of tradition over a long period of time. He ran out last of the Anok's family. He ran out when he was age 85. Okay, and it says that he died when he was 110. That's a pretty healthy, ripe old life. And so, Joshua takes a back seat to Caleb, as I told you a minute ago, for political reasons. But he also goes into the Holy Land. Evidently, he lived around Jerusalem. So after 400 years of captivity, they've been let go without a shot, so to speak. No danger. The Israelites leave Egypt with a few hanger-ons. Remember what we have it in our the rebel rousers or something like that. The riff-raff or something like that was in our lesson last week. And so they leave with those people. They travel across the river, the Red Sea, and head south down to Mount Sinai, stay there for a year, get all these instructions and get organized, and a lot of different things happen. They build the tabernacle, the predecessor of the temple, and the cloud appears, and the fire appears in the cloud or in the sky, and they travel sometimes in the day and sometimes in the night for 5 years, moving from wadi or oasis to oasis, places that they can survive and live. God gives them all the food that they need, though they whine, moan, and groan. Remember one time they whined and moaned and groaned about the manna, and he sent them doves. Can you imagine how many doves it takes to feed 2 million people? And when I used to eat them with my uncle, he'd eat 3 or 4. I mean, there's not much meat on doves. Okay, they're pretty slim birds. Get you a turkey or a big bird, that type of stuff. So anyhow, he's done these miraculous things for them. Caleb says, let's go up and possess this land. Let's go. We can conquer it. We can do it. Joshua says, amen, brother. Okay? The other 10 said, no, I'm afraid. I'm fearful. I don't want to do it. I don't think we can do it. And Caleb says, we're 2 million strong. We're scared to death, if nothing else, when 2 million people start walking up on them. Okay? But instead of choosing the easy way, God's way, Israel goes around the hard way. Okay? Look at where they go. Here's Kadesh Barnea. So it's taking the easy route. This is easy walking. There's a major interstate highway of that way to get you there. So no, let's do something real bright. Let's stupid. They head south again. They go all the way down, almost to the Nile Valley. Okay, moving all these people, trying to get water. And somebody asked me in the class today, was the cloud still moving them? There's no mention of the cloud or the fire ever again. Israel is moving on its own, not with God's intention. So they come down here, and then there are two ways. They went around out in the desert to avoid some more of these Edomites and Moabites and all the ites that are over here that would kill them off, slowly but sure. Make this long trek of over 100 miles. Come back in toward the promised land. Okay? And then the first thing they have to do is they have to cross the Jordan River. The Jordan River today is a trickle. Okay? It's kind of like a glorified creek. Okay? It's big enough you can go down and get baptized in, but I mean, it's as far as we get to the door, wide, okay, in most places. A little bit outside of it. And so, back in those days, it was probably similar to the Mississippi in New Orleans. It is a massive river. Today, they cut the water off and using it up, and so the Dead Sea to the south is drying up and disappearing because the water is cut off to use it for irrigation. Okay? But anyhow, back in those days, it was a mighty river. You got to get 2 million people across the river. Okay? Any of y'all know Herb that's in our class? Everybody know him? I looked at Herb and I said, Herb, would you want to be one of the road guys? Okay, I've got 100 in this load. Well, we've got 4,000 more loads to go. Paddling back and forth. I mean, you can't imagine how you do that. Then when you get across there, get into Jerusalem and get up on where you can really get to the people, you've got to go through the mountain pass, okay? And it's called the Jericho Pass. Remember the story of Jericho, where the Samaritan found the man who'd been robbed and picked him up and took him on into Jericho and paid for his stay and for his healing and just literally took care of the man. Okay, that's where that story comes from. The Jericho Road is about as wide as one side of our interstate with the drop off. Okay, I mean it's wider than this room, but it in most places it's someplace not even that wide. Okay, I've been just a little bit down in that road. I'm afraid to go any more stories scare you. They're probably safe today, whatever. The Palestinian didn't murder you or something like that. But anyhow, you've got to squeeze 2 million people through that little pass. Think about that. First thing I think in visual imagery is it's kind of like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. Okay. And I thought, no, it's really more like having a coffee gun. Trying to get a fine bead and get it out of there. That kind of stuff. So this is an amazing feat. Okay? And you got them across the area, across the river, and now you face these fortified cities. Okay? They have high walls. It's virtually impossible to break down high walls. And so the Israelis go after these people. And remember, they're not fighters. For 400 years, they have been slave people. They've been in the desert. There's nothing to make weapons out of in the desert. Okay? How they attack these people and wipe them out, nobody really knows. Because the Canaanites were certainly much better prepared. Remember, this is just the group that's along the Jordan River. They've got to get the other group on the other side of the mountain, which is over on the Mediterranean seaside. But they did. They killed them all off. They killed their cattle. They killed everything. They burned and destroyed all of their houses. Okay? Now, tremendous cost to the Canaanites. I'm sure a lot of them ran and got away. In fact, we know they did because some are still alive. Families are alive today. And so, but there's a great toll taken upon the Israelis also. A lot of them died. A lot of them were injured. A lot of them were maimed for life. I mean, it's gruesome stuff. The Bible talks about a lot of this gruesome stuff. And so, one thing leads to another, and finally they get through it. And I kept thinking about Frank Sinatra's way. He said, "I did it my way." Bad imitation, I know. Everybody on these cruise ships wants to do that. Like Whitney Houston, nobody can do that song except her. But essentially, the point is, Israel had to do it their way, instead of God's way. And so it makes it much harder, much more difficult for them. They eventually get to the promised land, but they pay a tremendous price. Now, let's kind of spring forward 3,000 years. Okay, this is 1000 BC. Okay, 1947, two tribes of Israel. One was Judah. I can't remember who the other one was, but probably the tribe that was how to say this? Probably the two tribes of Caleb and Joshua that they represented. Okay, and those two tribes gather an army and they become warriors. They come into the promised land, and in 7 days they take the land back in a war. It's called the 7-day war. Here's that number with sevens. All these numbers: 3, 7, 10, 12, 40, 70, that type of stuff. So they take it back over. Move along another 50 years or so. What happens October 6th? The Palestinians, who were up on the easy way to do it, but the Palestinians who are living up here on this plain have been enclosed by the Israelites. Okay, they have a fence and sometimes walls to keep the Palestinians in. They have just literally pushed them over to the coast and said, "Okay, you're okay, we won't bother you over there. You don't bother us, we won't bother you." There's another group of them just south of Jerusalem that control Nazareth. And Nazareth has looks like a prison camp, a mighty wall and razor wire on the top of it today. Okay, to keep those people away from the Jews. Okay, you have to go through a checkpoint. You felt like you're walking into a prison. Our Israeli tour guide, when I was over there, said, "I can't go in there, I might get killed." He said, "That's how bad it is." So we had a Christian lady. He says, "They won't kill a Christian lady." So she became our tour guide. She was a substitute for him and took us through there. But you felt creepy the whole time you were there. Okay? All right? And so these are the modern day Palestinians. Who are the Palestinians related to?
Ishmael.
Point? Ishmael? They are modern day Canaanites. They're descendants of Canaanites. Yeah, that type of thing. So here we are, 3,000 years. We're kind of back to where the story began. That type of thing. I find that kind of amazing as the battle goes on. Now, what can we say in summary about this? One is, God issues instructions to all of us. Okay? Obedience involves understanding, what He wants us to do. I don't know how, all of us are older and we've had to make a lot of decisions in our lives. Okay? And we've gotten better at it, hopefully. Okay? Just tell people, I can't remember really why I married my wife. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Okay? But those types of things. We make good decisions for the most part. Okay? But if you're like me, use the open door and closed door policy. The door is open, I walk through it. The door is closed, I don't even knock. Okay, there's to go there. Look for the open road, open door that God has given us. How do we balance acting in faith and also gathering information? Just use common sense. What do we do when apprehensions arise? Now, having been assigned a task, where do the obstacles come from? I'll give you a kind of a simple illustration. We've all been kids, and remember we're preteens who like to go to the pool and hang out with our friends, and you walk up. Here I am, and I'm a kid, and I walk up to the edge of the pool. I'm down by the deep end, and I think I want to jump in with my kids. And my dad says, "Go ahead and jump in." Oh, Dad, but I can't touch the bottom there. Well, it's okay. I taught you how to swim. I'm your father. I taught you how to swim. You know how to do all that. And so, Larry, go ahead and jump in. I'm afraid, Dad. What are you afraid of? You know how to swim. But we stand there in fear and in trepidation, afraid to take the next step sometimes. That may be a big step or even a small step. Like the kids out of the pool. Where does fear come from? Remember Roosevelt said, "The only thing we have to fear..." It's just a great delivery. "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Okay. And there's a lot of truth to that. That's a great quote, but there's a lot of biblical truth to that too. Where does fear come from? Fear comes from the evil one. We don't talk about the evil one much anymore. Okay? But yet he's so active and alive and working. He has the tool of fear in his toolbox. And I think it's probably the one he uses the most. It's got the most wear and tear on it. The one that's most convenient. It's easy. Just scare them a little bit, and they'll back away. They'll lose their faith, just like the Israelites did. Through our experiences with God and also with Christ in the New Testament, our faith becomes second nature. And I think there's a message for today. Probably we need to practice our faith to the point that it becomes just second nature to us. That type of thing. How do we walk by faith and not by sight? I'll give you another illustration. All of us drive to Birmingham. You leave here, how do you know Birmingham's going to be there?
You've been there.
It's always been there, when I've been before. Yeah. It's always proved out well to me. Okay, that type of stuff. I remember flying a plane one time. I was over near Hattiesburg, and I couldn't find the airport because we were flying at night, and they're supposed to leave the runway lights on to a certain time, and they automatically go off. Well, we saw Hattiesburg, and we thought, there's an airport down there somewhere. How are we going to find it? You have this little thing, if you get a radio call to the airport, you also can click on your light switch, and it will turn the lights of the airport on and off from your airplane. Okay. I know it's kind of fancy. I think it's really feel powerful. If you can even do it at Brooklyn after they close up at 8 o'clock at night, you fly at 10 o'clock and you turn all that on. I'm powerful. Okay. I couldn't find my airport, and finally I find the guy, and he says, "Just do the radio call." Well, it's not radio call. We call it click it. Whatever. You know all about this. But anyhow, I did that. Oh, there's runway lights. That's where I'm supposed to land. Oh, it is there. I can trust it. I can have faith in my equipment. Okay, we just trust our experiences. Okay. How many of you, before you sat down today, I didn't see anybody do this. I used to have an aunt that would do it. It drove me crazy. She was a nut, but I loved her. She would walk in and she would test to see. I think she'd fallen, and she was rather heavy set too. Aunt Mert was. Okay, and she would always kind of test to see to make sure. Of course, we had a lot of antique furniture in the houses back in those days too, and that's pretty old stuff. Mert would make sure, and then she'd sit down. Nobody here did that today because I looked. Why do we not do that? I'm sorry. Why do we not do that?
We've sat on it before.
So, say it again?
We've sat on it before.
Yeah. Our experience tells us it's safe. And our experiences with God and with Christ tell us things are safe.
Amen.
Okay? And there should be no fear. Faith is the conviction of what is true, holy, and divine. This belief can infect us like a virus. We live in the age of the viruses. What about spiritual viruses? That'd make a good sermon, wouldn't it? That'd be kind of interesting. Now, we think like the Israelites. You know, my God's not strong enough. Oh, He won't be there when I need Him. He won't come through for me. Oh, poor old me. We see things so small, and we fail to see that God sees things so big. You know. So if we had to come up with, I like one word stuff. I'm a pretty simple thinker. I can remember simple things. I can't remember a lot of complex things. And most of us are that way. You manage your checkbook, you know, don't have a spreadsheet. You probably have a spreadsheet. Okay. But you know what you're doing. But yeah, we keep things simple in life. If you had one word to describe today's lesson, it would be trust. Remember the old song we used to sing? You know, trust and obey, because there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Simple old songs. That song's over 100 years old, but still very, very enlightening in what we experience today. So Israel took the hard way. Took the hard way. Other thoughts and ideas? I find this stuff fascinating. I keep saying, if you ever get a chance, go to Israel. There are some tours open now, but I'm not going. I'm fearful.
I was going to ask that question to you. It's not a good idea to go over there right now.
Well, I think right now, but you never know when thing's going to break out. When my son and I were over there last time, they had 2 skirmishes while we were there, and we never knew about it.
Yeah.
You know, we were out in the wilderness area. They're not going to shoot missiles out there. There's 90 people out there. Even around Jerusalem, they're not going to attack Jerusalem. I can tell you one of the things that's really interesting. You know, a lot of people remember the Dead Sea Scrolls are at Qumran. They found just north of Jerusalem out there in those caves. 40,000 books found out there. On the other side of the Jordan River is the country of Jordan. And many people think the Ark of the Covenant was hidden there. If the Jews ever find that, of course the Jordanians will not let anybody excavate over there. There are no excavations. Ever find that hidden back in the deep one of those caves and bring that back to Jerusalem, Armageddon will have begun. There will be a war like we have never seen. And the valley will run red. So all those things, they talk about that. Other thoughts, ideas? Appreciate y'all's attention.
I have two questions.
Yes, go. Yeah.
On our map in the back of the book,
Sure.
Negev
Yeah,
is
Negev.
spelled N-E-G-A-V as in boy, and in our scripture it's N-A-V, N-E-G-V as in vector.
Yeah. Things get transliterated a lot in all these places over the
Then
years.
the other thing is, those grapes you brought at Publix only last a few days. About that. How did they bring back 40 pounds for 40 days?
Remember, they made a lot of wine. The water sources were terrible. Sanitation was horrible back in these days. And so a lot of the rivers were contaminated. They didn't have Clorox. They couldn't purify. And so they would make wine and drink a lot of wine, probably weak wine. But that's where they had a lot of grapes just to have water. You know. Remember, in Israel, the water, you get most of your water during the winter months, between about October and end of March. And after that, things dry up. There's one area near the Dead Sea Scrolls where people lived, just north of there. It's pretty close to, right north there is what's called Megiddo. This is north of Masada, which is, plateau where all the people killed after Israel took 3.5 years to build a ramp to get up to them. They climbed over the wall and all the people committed suicide. But there's a trough there between some of those mountains. It's just a giant hole, and it fills up with water in the winter. And people live out of it all summer long until the rains start again in October. They still do that, draw water from there. And it's pure water, it's pure mountain water. But, Jordan River is down to a trickle. So you can't live off it. All right. Thank you. Good to see y'all. And someone's going to